You spit in a tube. You waited 6 weeks, checking your email every few days for the notification that your results were finally ready. And when they finally came back, you found out you were part Scandinavian, or part Indigenous American, or part something you had never heard anyone in your family mention before. Not once, not even as a rumor. You screenshotted it. You told your relatives, maybe at a holiday dinner, maybe in a group chat that lit up with surprised reactions. Maybe you built a small piece of your identity around that one number, started reading about the region, felt a new sense of connection to a place you had never been. And then, a year later, sometimes less, you logged back in out of curiosity and the number was different. The Scandinavian percentage that used to be 6% is now 0. The Indigenous American ancestry that was never in your family story has quietly vanished, or worse, quietly appeared for the first time with no explanation at all. If this has happened to you, you are not alone. And you have probably wondered the same thing everyone wonders when it happens. Did I get scammed? Is this company just making it up as they go, changing numbers at random to keep people talking about their product? Here is what almost nobody explains clearly when you buy one of these kits at the checkout counter or through an online ad promising to reveal exactly who you really are. Your ethnicity percentage was never a measurement of your ancestry, in the way a scale measures your weight or a thermometer measures temperature. It was always a probability, a best guess generated by comparing your DNA to other people's DNA, and that guess is designed by its very nature to change as the comparison data improves. Understanding why will change the way you look at every DNA test result you have ever gotten, and every one you will get in the future. Before we start, this video is not sponsored by any testing company. I have no affiliate deals. I'm here to help you understand what your results actually mean, not to sell you a test. Let us get into it. Sign 1, your results are not measuring your DNA. They are measuring how similar your DNA is to other people's DNA. This is the single most important thing to understand, and almost no one explains it clearly when they hand over their money and spit into a tube. When a testing company tells you that you're 23% Scandinavian, they are not detecting some kind of Scandinavian gene inside you, glowing on a slide somewhere in a lab. There is no such thing as a gene for a nationality. What they are actually doing is comparing your genetic markers to a reference panel, a curated database of DNA samples from thousands of people who have well-documented family histories, tracing back generations in a specific region. People whose great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents are all independently verified to have lived in the same place with no known ancestry from anywhere else. If your DNA statistically resembles the patterns found in that Scandinavian reference group more than it resembles other reference groups, the algorithm assigns you a percentage. It is a resemblance test, not a location tracker, closer to a facial recognition system matching you to a photograph than a GPS device pinpointing exactly where your ancestors stood. And a resemblance test is only as good as the group of people you are being compared against, which brings us directly to the next problem. Sign 2, the reference panels are still being built, and they are not the same size for every region. AncestryDNA's reference panel, as of recent updates, is built from tens of thousands of DNA samples, and the company requires anyone included in that panel to have genealogical documentation proving a long, verified family history in the specific region their DNA is meant to represent. 23andMe's reference dataset includes over 14,000 individuals, plus several major public reference collections. It draws on as well. That sounds like a lot, until you realize those samples are not evenly distributed across the entire world. Regions with more genetic research funding and more participants, mostly in North America and Western Europe, produce sharper, more specific results, sometimes narrowed all the way down to a single country or even a sub-region within that country. Regions with fewer available samples get grouped into broader, vaguer categories, because the algorithm simply does not have enough comparison data to narrow things down further. This is why someone with deep ancestry in a well-studied region might get a precise breakdown down to a specific country, while someone with ancestry in a less studied region of the world gets a single broad label covering an entire continent, with no further detail available, no matter how many times they check back. The imprecision is not about your DNA being unusual or hard to read. It is about which parts of the world have had the most people willing, able, and financially positioned to submit samples into these commercial databases in the first place. Sign 3. The companies update their algorithms constantly, and every update can change your numbers, sometimes overnight. This is not a bug, and it is not a sign that something went wrong with your test. It is the entire business model working exactly as intended. As more people take these tests, the reference panels grow, and the companies periodically retrain their algorithms on that larger, more detailed dataset. AncestryDNA has stated directly that because their reference panel and their analysis methods both change as they collect more data, your results can and will change too, sometimes multiple times over the course of just a few years. 23andMe's most recent major overhaul added dozens of new reference populations across multiple continents, while simultaneously rebuilding their entire analysis pipeline specifically to reduce errors that had crept into earlier versions of the algorithm. When a company adds new reference populations or refines existing ones, results shift for everyone in their database simultaneously, sometimes dramatically, all on the same day, without a single person's actual DNA changing even slightly. A 6% Scandinavian result can drop to 0, not because your ancestry changed, but because the algorithm got better at distinguishing genuine Scandinavian markers from neighboring Northern European markers that used to get lumped together in the same broad bucket. I have heard from people who describe this happening 2 or 3 separate times over just a few years of owning the same test, watching an ancestry they had built into their identity simply vanish from their account with an update notification and no further explanation beyond a note that the science had improved. Sign 4, your full siblings can get noticeably different results from the exact same 2 parents, sometimes different enough to look like they are barely related at all in the ethnicity breakdown. This confuses more people than almost anything else about these tests. And it makes perfect biological sense once you understand how DNA inheritance actually works underneath the surface. You inherit 50% of your DNA from each parent, but which 50% is randomized through a process called genetic recombination, where each strand of DNA gets cut, shuffled, and reassembled before being passed down. Every egg and every sperm cell carries a different randomly shuffled combination of a parent's genetic material, meaning no 2 eggs and no 2 sperm cells are ever genetically identical to each other, even from the exact same 2 parents. This means 2 full siblings born to the same mother and father share on average only about 50% of their DNA with each other, not 100% as most people naturally assume. If one of your grandparents carried a small percentage of a specific regional ancestry buried somewhere in their genome, that portion of DNA might get passed down fully to one sibling and barely at all, or not at all, to another sibling entirely. Neither result is wrong, and neither sibling's test is broken. Both are accurate reflections of what each person actually inherited through pure genetic chance, which is simply not identical between siblings, even full biological siblings raised in the exact same household by the exact same parents. Sign 5. Small percentages are the least reliable numbers on your entire report, no matter how exciting they might feel the moment you first see them. If your results show 1, 2, or 3% from a region you have never heard connected to your family, treat that number with real skepticism, not excitement, and definitely not as the foundation for a new personal identity. Genetic counselors who work directly with these companies have explained that small trace percentages sit closest to the margin of statistical error inherent in the entire method, essentially the genetic equivalent of background noise the algorithm is doing its best to interpret with limited information. 23. And me actually lets users adjust a confidence slider built directly into the results interface, and raising that slider to a higher confidence threshold, say from 50% confidence up to 90% confidence, routinely makes small trace percentages disappear entirely, because the algorithm was never highly confident about them in the first place, and was only reporting them at all under a looser, more permissive standard. A large, consistent percentage, 40% Irish, 30% Nigerian, 60% East Asian, is generally trustworthy at the broad continental or regional level and tends to hold steady across updates. A small, scattered 1 or 2% from an unexpected region on the other side of the world is exactly the kind of number that evaporates the next time the company updates its reference panel, and it should never be treated as proof of anything specific about your ancestry on its own, no matter how good a story it might make at a family gathering. Subscribe right now, because the next 2 signs cover exactly why your AncestryDNA results and your 23andMe results can look completely different, even when you send in the exact same spit sample to both companies on the same afternoon. Why one company's 4% Nigerian result can become another company's 0% result with no explanation offered anywhere in either report, and the specific, practical step you should take before you ever trust a surprising number enough to change how you think about your own family history. Subscribe, hit the bell, and stay with me. Sign 6. Different companies will give you different answers from the exact same spit sample, and neither one is more correct than the other. If you have ever tested with more than one company and compared the results side by side, you have probably noticed the numbers do not match, sometimes not even close, sometimes different enough to make you wonder if one of the companies is simply guessing. This happens for a simple structural reason. Every company builds its own separate reference panel, draws its own regional boundaries on the map, and runs its own proprietary algorithm that no other company has access to. One company might report Northern Italy as its own distinct region, complete with its own specific percentage, while another company lumps all of Italy, north and south, into a single broader Southern European category with no further breakdown available. One company might detect 6% Scandinavian ancestry, where another detects less than 1% from the exact same DNA sample, simply because the 2 companies drew the line between what counts as Scandinavian and what counts as general Northern European in slightly different places on their respective maps. Neither company is lying to you, and neither one is necessarily wrong in any meaningful sense. They are simply using different maps to describe the same underlying territory, and the territory itself, actual human genetic ancestry accumulated over thousands of years of migration and intermarriage, does not actually follow the clean, modern national borders we use in everyday conversation about where a family is from. Sign 7. The fix is not chasing a better test or testing with every company on the market, hoping one of them gives you the answer you want. The fix is treating percentages as clues, not conclusions. If a surprising result shows up in your DNA test, the correct next step is not to panic, and it is not to assume the company got it wrong and demand a refund. The correct next step is to treat that percentage the exact same way a detective treats a single piece of evidence at a crime scene as something worth investigating further, not something to build your entire identity around by itself based on one number on a screen. Download your raw DNA data, which every major company is required to allow you to do, usually through a simple request in your account settings. Consider uploading that raw data to a free independent analysis tool that is not trying to sell you a subscription or a follow-up product, since independent tools sometimes surface details the original company's own interface does not prominently display. Look for actual DNA matches, real living relatives connected to you through shared, identifiable segments of DNA, rather than relying only on the ethnicity percentage summary at the top of your results page, since matches to real people are far more stable and far more genealogically useful than a shifting regional percentage. And cross-reference anything surprising against actual paper records, census documents, immigration records, church records, and family trees, the same kind of documented history that existed and was perfectly reliable long before DNA testing was ever invented. A DNA percentage is a hint pointing you toward a paper trail worth following. It was never meant to replace that paper trail entirely, and treating a shifting percentage as the final word on who you are is exactly how so many people end up confused, disappointed, or quietly misled by a number that was designed from the very beginning to shift the moment the underlying science improves even slightly. 7 signs. Your results were never a measurement, only ever a resemblance test built on comparison to a database of other people's documented family histories. The reference panels behind that comparison are still being built unevenly, region by region, shaped by which parts of the world have had the resources and the willingness to participate in commercial genetic databases. The algorithms update constantly, and every single update can move your numbers without moving your actual ancestry at all, sometimes more than once over just a few years of owning the same test. Full siblings can look genetically different from each other on paper because inheritance itself is randomized at the molecular level every single time an egg or sperm cell forms. Small trace percentages are the least trustworthy numbers on the entire report. Sitting closest to the edge of statistical noise the algorithm can barely distinguish from genuine signal. Different companies draw different maps of the exact same genetic territory, which is why your results never quite match across platforms even when the underlying DNA sample is identical. And the fix was never a better test, or testing with a third or fourth company hoping for a different answer. It was always learning to treat a percentage as a starting point for real research, not as the final word on who you are or where you come from. If a DNA test ever told you something surprising, here is what to do next, step by step, rather than reacting to the number alone. Start by downloading your raw data, a feature every major testing company is required to provide somewhere in your account settings, even if it takes a little digging to find the option. Then look into free, independent third-party tools designed specifically to analyze that raw data without a company's marketing incentives attached to the results. Since these tools often surface useful detail, the original company chooses not to highlight prominently. Cross-reference anything unexpected against actual historical records, since a documented ancestor in a specific place at a specific time, found in a census page or a ship manifest, will always tell you more than a shifting percentage ever can, no matter how many times that percentage gets recalculated, and if your results still leave you with real persistent questions. After doing that research yourself, professional genetic genealogists exist specifically to help people separate a genuine ancestral discovery from ordinary statistical noise, and many of them offer consultations built for exactly this kind of situation, walking through both the DNA evidence and the paper trail together. Subscribe right now if this video changed the way you will look at your next DNA update. Every week on this channel, we go this deep into the real science and the real history behind the family stories most people never get a chance to fully understand. Subscribe, like this video, hit the notification bell, and leave a comment below. Has your DNA test ever changed dramatically between updates? Which region appeared or disappeared? And did it match what you already knew about your family? Tell me what happened and which company you tested with. This is where the real conversations happen on this channel. Share this with anyone who has ever screenshotted a DNA result and built a story around it. because the real science behind these tests is more interesting and more useful than any single percentage on a screen.